The front door had barely clicked shut behind me when I heard her voice carrying down the hallway like something sharp thrown across a room. Finally. I've been waiting since 5:30. Go wash up and start breakfast. We like eggs over easy, not scrambled, and my son doesn't eat turkey bacon. I don't know what you've been feeding him, but real bacon only. And make sure the coffee is ready before the eggs. I don't like waiting for coffee. I stood in my own entryway, still in my scrubs, my feet aching in the way they only do after 12 hours on the floor of a cardiac unit. My hair half fallen out of the bun I'd put it in before my shift started, the evening before. It was 6:14 in the morning. I had driven home in the dark, stopping once at a red light and catching myself closing my eyes for just a second too long. My mother-in-law was standing in the kitchen doorway in a silk robe, arms crossed, looking at me the way someone looks at a vending machine that hasn't dispensed their snack yet. I didn't say anything right away. I set my bag down on the bench by the door, the bench I had bought at an estate sale 2 years before I even met my husband, before this house was anything other than mine, and I looked at her. "Good morning," I said. "The coffee won't make itself," she said, and turned back into the kitchen. My husband and I had been married for 3 years, we'd been together for 5. His parents had visited twice before, both times for long weekends, both times manageable in the way that things are manageable when there's a clear end date and everyone is on their best behavior. This visit was different. This visit, my mother-in-law had announced over the phone 2 weeks earlier that she and my father-in-law wanted to come stay for a while, and when I asked what a while meant, she said, "Oh, we'll see how things go," and laughed in a way that made something in my chest tighten. They had been in my house for 4 days. My name is Sophie. I'm 31 years old. I'm a registered nurse, cardiac care unit, 12-hour overnight shifts 3 or 4 times a week. I bought my house when I was 27, 2 years before I married my husband, Daniel, and the deed has my name on it. Not our names. Mine. We talked about refinancing, about adding him to the title, but we never got around to it, and after the last 4 days, I was starting to understand that maybe some part of me had known, even then, to keep one thing that was completely, unambiguously mine. I had worked the night before from 7 in the evening until 7 in the morning. I had taken care of 6 patients, one of whom coded at 3 a.m., and another of whom cried for an hour because she was scared and her family wasn't there yet. I had held her hand until she calmed down. I had done this on 4 hours of sleep from the day before because my mother-in-law had decided that the guest bedroom, which shares a wall with our room, was too quiet, and she needed the television on to fall asleep, and she had the volume at a level that I could identify specific dialogue through 2 walls and a closed door. When I had mentioned this to Daniel, gently, the second night, he had rubbed the back of his neck and said, "She's always been like that, Soph. She'll adjust." She had not adjusted. I went to work that second night running on almost nothing, and I came home the third morning to find that my mother-in-law had reorganized my kitchen. Not tidied. Reorganized. The cast iron skillet I'd had since culinary school I took a semester before switching to nursing was on the wrong shelf. The mugs were in a different cabinet. The spices I kept by the stove were gone, relocated to a drawer I never opened because she'd decided the counter looked cluttered. "I thought I'd help you get more organized," she said when I found her at the table drinking coffee. "A cluttered kitchen means a cluttered mind." "I knew where everything was," I said. "You'll adjust," she said, and smiled, and sipped her coffee. I was so tired that I actually laughed, which I think she took as agreement. That was 3 days ago. Now it was morning 4, and I was standing in my entryway in my scrubs at 6:15 a.m. And my mother-in-law was in my kitchen telling me what kind of bacon to make. I walked into the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and drank it standing at the sink. "The eggs," she said from the table, where she had sat back down with her phone. "I just got home," I said. "I need a few minutes." "It's not a big production, Sophie. Eggs and bacon. My son grew up on a real breakfast every morning, and I don't think that's too much to ask." I set my glass down. "Your son is 34 years old and he knows how to use the stove. I've been on my feet for 12 hours. I'm going to sit down for a minute." The look she gave me, then I want to describe it accurately because I've spent a lot of time since then trying to make sure I wasn't imagining it or exaggerating it. It was the look of someone who has just realized that the thing they are dealing with is going to be more trouble than they expected, and who has decided, in that moment, that the appropriate response is not to reconsider their position but to apply more pressure. "I see," she said. "I see how it is." I didn't ask what that meant. I went to the living room, sat on my couch, and pulled out my phone to decompress for a few minutes, the way I always do after a night shift. Scroll through something mindless, let my brain shift gears. I'd been sitting there for maybe 6 minutes when my father-in-law came downstairs, looked at me on the couch in my scrubs, and said, "Is breakfast ready?" "Not yet," I said. He made a sound that was not quite a word and went into the kitchen, and I heard him say something to my mother-in-law in a low voice, and I heard her say, I know, and then the sound of cabinets opening and closing with slightly more force than necessary. Daniel came downstairs at 6:45. He kissed me on the top of the head without really looking at me, said, "Long night?" and went straight to the kitchen. I heard my mother-in-law say something about how she'd had to start the coffee herself, and I heard Daniel laugh, a short easy laugh, the kind that cost him nothing, and I sat on my couch in my dirty scrubs, and felt something inside me go very quiet and very cold. I should tell you about the kind of person my mother-in-law is, because I don't want you to think this was about a few misunderstandings and a difference in housekeeping styles. She is the kind of person who has decided, at some point in her life, that love is a transaction and that her investment in her son entitles her to a permanent seat at the table of his life, regardless of who else is sitting there. She raised Daniel to believe that his parents' comfort was a moral priority, not just a preference. She once told me, during that first long weekend visit, that a wife's job was to hold the family together, which I'd found a funny thing to say to a woman who works night shifts in a cardiac unit because someone has to be there when hearts stop. She had never said anything directly cruel to me before this visit. She had been the particular kind of difficult that is hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it, the comments that are technically compliments but land like criticism, the questions that aren't really questions, the helpfulness that costs you more than it gives. I had managed it. I had told myself that she lived 3 states away and that Daniel was a good man in most of the ways that mattered and that every family has its things. But something about being in my house, sleeping in my guest room, eating in my kitchen, had changed the calculation for her. Like the territory had shifted and she was staking a claim. The eggs incident happened on day 5. I had slept after the 6:15 morning confrontation, deeply and without dreams, for about 6 hours. I woke up at 1 in the afternoon feeling almost human. I showered, changed, and came downstairs to find my mother-in-law had invited my husband's aunt who lived 40 minutes away and who I had met exactly once over for lunch. In my kitchen, using my groceries. Without mentioning it to me. There were 4 people sitting at my dining table when I came downstairs. My mother-in-law, my father-in-law, the aunt, and Daniel, who had been home from work since noon. Nobody had called me. Nobody had knocked on the door. They had just arranged themselves in my house like it was already theirs. "Sophie!" my mother-in-law said when she saw me, with the bright enthusiasm of someone who is performing normalcy for an audience. "Come sit down. We saved you a plate." The aunt smiled at me with the careful warmth of someone who has been told some version of me in advance. I sat down. I ate. I made small talk with the aunt, who turned out to be perfectly nice and who I don't blame for any of what happened. I ate my food and I looked at Daniel across the table and he looked back at me with an expression that I recognize now as the expression of a man who knows something is wrong and has decided that acknowledging it will make it worse. After lunch, when the aunt had left and my father-in-law was watching television and Daniel was in his office, I found my mother-in-law in the kitchen washing dishes. I started to help. We stood side by side at the sink and I said, quietly, "I'd appreciate a heads up next time you want to have someone over." She didn't stop washing. "She's family. She's your family, she's a stranger to me, and this is my house." She turned and looked at me then, hands still wet, and she said, "Your house. I see. My son lives here too." "Yes." And I'm asking, as the person whose name is on the deed, to be included in decisions about who comes into it. She dried her hands very slowly on the dish towel that hangs by the sink, the one I bought at a farmer's market that says "Be the reason someone smiles today," which I now find funny in a bleak way, and she looked at me with an expression I didn't have a word for at the time. I have one now. It was contempt. "I've never in my life," she said, "been spoken to like that in my son's home. It's not his home, it's mine. He lives here. I'm glad he lives here, but the deed says my name." She walked out of the kitchen. I heard her go upstairs. I heard her knock on Daniel's office door. I want to tell you what happened in that room, but I wasn't there. I only know what came after, which was Daniel coming downstairs 20 minutes later, jaw tight, and saying, "Can we talk?" We sat in the living room. My father-in-law had turned the television up, which I suspected was not accidental. "She's really upset," Daniel said. "I know. She feels like you've been cold to her since they got here." I looked at him. I looked at him for a long time, long enough that he shifted in his seat. "Daniel, I've been working 12-hour overnight shifts. I come home at 6 in the morning and she's waiting to tell me to cook breakfast. She reorganized my kitchen without asking. She invited your aunt to lunch without telling me. When I asked to be included, she made me feel like I was being unreasonable. I'm not cold. I'm exhausted and I'm in my own house and I feel like a guest in it." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "She doesn't mean it like that, that's how she is. She shows love through hospitality. It's not her hospitality. It's mine. She's the guest. She's my mother, Soph. I know she's your mother. And I'm your wife. And I live here. And I need you to help me here." He said he would talk to her. I believed him because I wanted to, which is the only explanation I have. That night I had a shift, and I went in still tired, still unsettled, and I took care of my patients with the part of me that always shows up for that regardless of what's happening in my personal life. And I came home the next morning at 6:20 to find my mother-in-law in the hallway outside my bedroom door. Not walking past it. Standing outside it. She had her arms crossed and she was looking at the door like she was deciding something. "Can I help you?" I asked. She turned and looked at me, and I saw immediately that something had shifted overnight, that whatever conversation had happened with Daniel had not gone the way she wanted, and that I was about to feel the consequence of that. "I want to talk to you," she said. "I just got off a shift. I've been waiting." "I'm sure you have," I said, and I opened my bedroom door and started to go in, and she put her hand on the door. Not hard, not violent, just her hand on the door, stopping it. I turned and looked at her hand. Then I looked at her. "Remove your hand from my door," I said. She removed it. But her eyes had gone a different kind of cold, the kind that I have come to understand as the specific coldness of a person who has never been told no and is deciding what to do with the information. "I know what you're doing," she said. "You think because your name is on some paper that you can treat us like tenants, like intruders. My son has given you everything. Your son has given me a wonderful marriage that I am trying very hard to protect right now. You're trying to take him away from his family." I was so tired. I want you to understand how tired I was, not as an excuse for what I said next, but as context for why I had run out of the particular kind of patience that had been keeping me measured and careful for days. "I haven't taken him anywhere," I said. "He is standing in the kitchen making coffee right now, and he didn't come up here when he heard us talking, which should probably tell you something about someone in this situation, but it isn't me." I don't know exactly what happened in her face when I said that. I was looking at her, and then I was not looking at her because I had turned to go into my room, and then I felt the flat, hard sting of an open hand across my left cheek. She slapped me. In my hallway. In my house. I stood very still. My face was hot. My ears were ringing in the particular way that shock produces before pain fully arrives. I turned back around slowly, and I looked at her, and she was standing there with her hand still raised slightly, and her expression had gone from rage to something else, something that might have been realization, to the look of someone who has just gone further than they intended and is watching the distance open up between who they thought they were and what they just did. "Sophie?" Daniel's voice from the bottom of the stairs. Neither of us moved. Soph, what's going on? I walked to the top of the stairs. I looked down at my husband, who was standing there with his coffee cup, still in his pajamas, looking up at me with an expression I have spent a lot of time since then trying to forgive. Your mother just slapped me, I said. The silence that followed was the kind that tells you everything. He looked past me, up the hallway. He looked back at me. He opened his mouth, and he said, and I need you to understand that I am not editorializing here, that these were the actual words that came out of his mouth. I'm sure she didn't mean it like that. I went into my bedroom. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed in my scrubs, and I pressed my hand to my face, and I thought, with a clarity I had not expected, that I was done. Not done with the argument. Not done with the visit. Done. I called my best friend, Carrie, who had been telling me for days that this situation was not normal and that I needed to stop managing it and start addressing it. I told her what had happened. She said, I'm coming over, and I said, no, I need you to help me think. We talked for 40 minutes while I sat in my room, and Daniel knocked twice, and I didn't answer. When I came out, my mother-in-law was not in the hallway. I went downstairs. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, and he stood up when he saw me and started talking, and I want to tell you what he said, but honestly I had stopped taking it in by the second sentence. I recognized the words. She was upset. It was a difficult trip, stress of travel, she didn't mean it, she loves me. Family is complicated, but they arrived in the wrong order and landed nowhere, the way language does when you have made a decision and the other person doesn't know yet. I need you to ask your parents to stay somewhere else, I said when he stopped. Sophie, this is not a negotiation. This is me telling you what I need in my house. Your mother put her hands on me. That's assault. I'm not asking her to leave because I'm angry. I'm asking her to leave because I am not safe with her here, and I need my home to feel safe. You're not going to press charges. I haven't decided what I'm going to do. What I have decided is that she doesn't sleep under my roof tonight. He ran his hand through his hair. He sat down. He said, You're putting me in an impossible position. Something that I had been trying to keep warm inside me went completely cold. I'm putting you in an impossible position, I said. I don't mean it like that. How do you mean it? He didn't answer. I went upstairs. I packed a bag not because I was leaving, but because I needed to do something with my hands while I made decisions. I called the non-emergency police line and I reported the incident. The officer I spoke to was patient and thorough and told me I had the right to file a formal complaint and that what had occurred was technically battery under state law. I told them I would think about it. I noted the report number. Then I called a locksmith. I want to be precise about my state of mind in that moment because I think people sometimes expect that when a woman gets to the end of her rope, she should be falling apart. I was not falling apart. I had taken care of 6 patients the night before, one of whom had been actively dying. I had held someone's hand at 3 a.m. and helped her breathe through her fear. I knew what a crisis looked like and I knew how to move through one, and what was happening in my house was not beyond me. What it was clarifying. My mother-in-law came to find me while I was sitting on the bed going through my phone. She knocked, which surprised me, and I said, Come in, and she came in and stood in the doorway with a look that in another context might have been humility. I'd like to talk, she said. I reported what happened to the police, I said. I want you to know that. Something moved across her face. You reported it. Yes. I have a case number. I haven't decided whether to file a formal complaint, but I needed there to be a record. She was quiet for longer than I expected, then she said, I don't know what came over me. I do, I said. I think you've never been told no by anyone in Daniel's life before, and when I told you no, clearly, and in your own words, something happened that you weren't prepared for. I'm not saying I understand it, I'm saying I see it. She sat down on the chair by the window without being invited. I let her, because I was curious. His father and I have always been close to him, she said. I know. It's hard, watching someone else. I haven't taken him from you, I said for the second time, and this time I meant it less gently. But I will not be hurt in my own home. I need you and my father-in-law to stay somewhere else for the rest of your visit. There are good hotels nearby. I'll text you some options." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Daniel will be very upset with you." "I know," I said. "I'm prepared for that." She left the room without another word. 40 minutes later, from my bedroom window, I watched my mother-in-law and my father-in-law put their bags in the rental car. My father-in-law did not look up at the house. My mother-in-law looked up once, at my window, and I did not move back from it. Daniel did not come upstairs until after they had driven away. He came in and sat on the bed, and he was quiet for a long time, and when he spoke, his voice was tired in a way that I recognized because it was the same way I had sounded for 4 days. "I should have handled this better," he said. I turned and looked at him. "Yes. I didn't know what to do. They're my parents. I know they're your parents. And I know it's hard. But Daniel, when she put her hand on that door, when she slapped me, you were 20 feet away, and you asked me if I was sure she didn't mean it. You asked me that. Not her, me." He didn't say anything. "I need you to understand what that did," I said. "Not just the slap, that I can survive. But you standing at the bottom of the stairs and asking me if I was sure. That's the part I keep coming back to." He covered his face with his hands and stayed that way for a while. When he took them away, his eyes were red. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know. Is it enough?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the woman at the bottom of the stairs with her coffee cup. I thought about the 6 mornings before this one. I thought about the way he had laughed with his mother in the kitchen on my first morning back, easy and costless, while I sat on the couch in dirty scrubs. "I don't know yet," I said. "I think we need to figure some things out. We did not divorce." I want to be clear about that because I think the story of a marriage is not usually the story of one incident, and this marriage had more in it than this one terrible week. What we did instead was something harder. We went to couples therapy, which Daniel had resisted before and agreed to now. And we had the conversations that we had been not having for years about what it meant to be each other's family, to choose each other, to live in a house where one name is on the deed and both people have to feel at home. His parents stayed at the Hampton Inn for the rest of their visit. My mother-in-law and I have never discussed what happened in the hallway again, not directly. What we have done is renegotiate, quietly, the terms of things. She calls before she asks to visit. She asks how long is a good amount of time. She stays for 5 days now, maximum, and she has not reorganized a single thing in my kitchen. I don't know if that's growth or consequence management. I'm not sure it matters. What I know is that I came home one morning at 6:20 a.m. from a shift where I held someone's hand through the worst night of her life, and I walked into my own house, and someone thought they could make me small in it. And I found out in the particular way that you can only find out when it's tested that I was not available to be made small. Not in a house with my name on the door. Not in a hallway I had walked down 10,000 times before she ever set foot in it. My face doesn't hurt anymore. That part healed fast, the way things do when you're young and your body knows what to do. The rest of it took longer. The part where I sat with the understanding that the man I married had stood at the bottom of the stairs and asked me if I was sure, that part I carried for a while, turned over in my hands, examined in the dark on nights when I couldn't sleep between shifts. I'm not sure I have a clean ending for you. What I have is this. I still sleep in the same bed. My name is still on the deed. My cast iron skillet is back where it belongs. And if someone comes into my house, the one I bought, the one with my name on the paperwork, the one where I come home at 6 in the morning and take off my shoes at the door, if someone comes into my house and decides that the way I live in it is an invitation, I know now, with a certainty I did not have before, what I am going to do about it. I'm going to tell them, clearly and without apology, whose house they are standing in. And I'm not going to ask twice.